She hid between a billionaire's legs to escape her ex and ended up becoming his fake wife. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Today's story is called She Hid Between a Billionaire's Legs to Escape Her Ex and Ended Up Becoming His Fake Wife. In one of Brest, WN, it all began on a rainy evening inside the grand ballroom of the Astoria Crown Hotel in New York City. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above a crowd of the city's elite, champagne glasses sparkled in manicured hands, and laughter echoed like music. But at the edge of that glittering world, a young waitress named Lila Torres was running for her life. Her heart pounded beneath the thin fabric of her uniform. Behind her, the voice she feared most tore through the noise. Evan, her ex-boyfriend, and the hotel's senior manager, the man she had once trusted, now threatening to destroy her after she reported his abuse. "Lila," he shouted, "you think you can humiliate me and walk away?" End quote. When you forget. She pushed through the crowd, breath sharp, panic clawing at her chest. In her frantic escape, she stumbled into the VIP section, a place she was never meant to be. The lights were dimmer there, the atmosphere colder, quieter. A man in a tailored black suit sat alone, scanning a business report on his phone. His name was Adrian Cole, the youngest billionaire in New York, known for his ruthless precision and silence that could silence an entire boardroom. Lila did not know who he was. She only saw safety a shadow to hide behind. She dropped to the floor, crawling beneath the long velvet tablecloth, and froze as Evan's angry footsteps grew closer. The smell of polished leather filled her lungs. She looked up and realized, with horror, that she was hiding between a man's legs. Adrian slowly lowered his phone. His blue-gray eyes flicked down, confused but calm. "What are you doing under my table?" His voice was low, controlled, with a trace of danger. Lila whispered, shaking. Please do not move. I am just hiding. He will hurt me." Then Evan appeared, face red, sweat gleaming on his forehead. "Mr. Cole, I am sorry," he stammered, recognizing the billionaire instantly. "Have you seen a woman in a waitress uniform run through here?" Adrian's expression did not change. He looked at the trembling figure beneath the table, then back at Evan. His next words were smooth, deliberate, the kind that could change a life. "You mean my wife?" The room fell silent. Evan froze. The word wife hung in the air like a command. Lila's eyes widened under the tablecloth. She wanted to protest, but Adrian's legs shifted slightly, a silent warning to stay still. Evan stammered, "Your wife? I must have been mistaken." "Clearly," Adrian said, his gaze unflinching. "Now leave before I make a call you will regret." Evan's face drained of color. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. For a long moment, Lila stayed hidden, her breath uneven, her body trembling. Then Adrian leaned down, lifted the tablecloth slightly, and met her wide eyes. "You can come out now," he said softly. "The danger is gone." She crawled out slowly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, her uniform torn at the sleeve. "I am so sorry, sir," she stammered. "I did not mean to." He raised a hand to stop her. "You are shaking," he said, his tone shifting from stern to calm. "Sit." Lila hesitated, then sat across from him. The contrast between them was surreal, her drenched uniform and trembling hands against his pristine tuxedo and quiet composure. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian studied her face for a moment longer before replying. "You are welcome, but you should know, Miss Torres," she said. "Lila Torres." "Well, Miss Torres," he said with a faint, knowing smile, "pretending to be my wife might have just started something we cannot undo." The orchestra swelled again. Cameras flashed somewhere across the ballroom, and in that instant, one born of fear and luck, the life of a poor waitress and a lonely billionaire became entangled in a lie that would soon feel dangerously real. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the gray skyline of Manhattan. Lila Torres woke in the small, shared apartment she could barely afford. Her hands still trembled when she remembered the previous night, the billionaire, the lie, and the look in his eyes when he said, "You mean my wife?" Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Torres?" The voice was calm, confident, unmistakable. "This is Adrian Cole." She sat up straight. "Mr. Cole, how did you—" "I have my ways," he interrupted. "We need to talk. The press caught our little performance last night. By morning, half of New York believes you are Mrs. Cole." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "There are pictures, headlines, and for me that is a problem," he said. "But maybe also a solution. That is little to getting out." 2 hours later, she stood in the marble lobby of Cole Industries, feeling like an intruder in another world. Assistants hurried past in sleek suits. A digital screen above the reception desk showed the headline, "Mysterious Woman Saves Billionaire's Image." Who is Adrian Cole's secret wife? When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into silence. His office was vast, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the kind of view that made you forget how small you were. Adrian turned from the glass wall as she entered, perfectly composed in a dark suit. "Sit down, Miss Torres," he said. Lila obeyed, gripping the edge of her chair. "Mr. Cole, I am sorry about what happened. I swear I did not mean to cause trouble. I just—" He raised a hand slightly. "You needed help, you got it. Now we both have to manage the consequences." He placed a folder on the table between them. "This is a contract. 3 months. You will act as my wife. Public appearances, charity events, family gatherings. You will receive protection, accommodations, and a payment of $100,000 at the end of the term." Lila blinked, stunned. "You want me to pretend to be your wife? Again?" "I want to control the narrative," he said flatly. "The board has been pressuring me to appear more stable. They believe marriage means responsibility. I do not care for that image, but I cannot afford a scandal right now." She shook her head. "Why me? You could hire anyone, someone who belongs in your world." Adrian's eyes softened slightly. "Because you are real. You did not plan this. That makes you believable." He leaned back in his chair. "You will have privacy. A separate room at my penthouse. You will attend 5 events with me, answer no questions, and follow the conditions listed here." He tapped the folder. "No emotional involvement, no interference in my business, no lies beyond the ones we agree upon." Lila stared at the papers. Every line seemed to weigh a ton. "And if I say no?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Then the tabloids will devour you by morning. Your name, your photo, your story. Evan will find you again. I cannot stop that without a legal reason to keep you close." Silence filled the office. Outside, traffic horns blared faintly through the glass. Lila took a deep breath. 3 months, she murmured. "After that, I walk away." Adrian nodded once. 3 months. No strings. He extended a pen. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing his. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something behind his control, not arrogance, but fatigue, loneliness. When she signed, Adrian stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Cole." They're work sharks. That night, a black car pulled up to a penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. The driver opened the door, and Lila stepped out, clutching the contract in her hand. The glass tower loomed above her like a different universe. Somewhere inside, a man who had everything and nothing waited for her to play the perfect wife in a world built on appearances. And as the city lights shimmered across the water, Lila whispered to herself, 3 months. I can survive 3 months. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a world Lila Torres had only seen in movies. The penthouse stretched wider than the entire floor of her old apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering skyline of New York City. The air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive coffee. Every step she took echoed across polished marble floors. Adrian Cole stood by the grand piano near the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, his posture effortlessly composed. He looked like he belonged to this world of silence and order, where nothing happened by accident. "You are late," he said without turning around. "The driver got lost," Lila replied quietly. "Or maybe I did." He glanced over his shoulder, the faintest hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "You will get used to it. For the next 3 months, this is home." "It's not me to same day with Thrudge." They were plies with a nos in the braes fallow. A woman appeared from the hallway, tall, immaculate, her gray hair tied in a neat bun. "This is Mrs. Weaver," Adrian said. "She manages the household. If you need anything, tell her." Mrs. Weaver nodded stiffly. "Your wardrobe and schedule are ready, Mrs. Cole." Lila almost corrected her but caught Adrian's warning glance. "Thank you," she murmured. Mrs. Weaver led her through the penthouse, pointing out each room like a museum tour. The marble kitchen, the glass-walled library, and finally a guest suite that felt more like a luxury hotel. A silk gown hung on the closet door, a note pinned to it in Adrian's handwriting. "Wear this. Dinner at 7. When the clock struck 7, she stepped into the dining room, wearing the black gown. It fit her perfectly, almost unnervingly so. Adrian looked up from his phone, his gaze steady. "Better," he said simply. "Sit." Dinner was silent at first. Only the soft clink of silverware filled the space. Lila tried to relax, but the grandeur around her made every movement feel wrong. She finally asked, "So, what happens now?" Adrian looked up, his voice calm. "Now, we act married." He explained the upcoming scheduled charity gala on Friday, a business dinner next week, a weekend trip to his family's estate in Connecticut. Each event was another layer of the lie they had agreed to build together. "You will need to learn a few things," he said. "How to handle reporters, what to say, how to smile when you do not want to." "I am not very good at pretending," she said softly. "Good," he replied. "That is what makes you believable." Later that night, Lila stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind was cold against her skin, but she stayed there, trying to understand what she had just signed up for. Behind her, she heard Adrian's footsteps. "Do you always stare at the city like it owes you something?" he asked. "Do you always hide behind the glass like it cannot touch you?" she countered. He did not answer. Instead, he took off his suit jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "You will catch a cold. Try not to make headlines for the wrong reasons." Their eyes met briefly in the reflection of the glass. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them shifted, less tense, more curious. When he left, Lila glanced down at the city again. Somewhere below, Evan was probably still looking for her. Somewhere beyond that, the world believed she was married to the man who owned half the skyline. She looked at the contract folded on the coffee table. The ink was still fresh beside her signature. "No emotional involvement," she whispered, reading the line aloud. But the warmth of his jacket on her shoulders told her that rule was already in danger. Inside the penthouse, Adrian poured another drink, watching her from afar. For the first time in years, the quiet did not feel like peace. It felt like the beginning of something he could not control. By Friday evening, the transformation was complete. Leila Torres no longer looked like a waitress who had once hidden under a table. She stood before the mirror of the penthouse dressing room, wearing a sleek silver gown that shimmered under the lights. Her hair, once a messy ponytail, now framed her face in soft waves. The reflection staring back at her looked like someone else entirely. Mrs. Weaver handed her a pair of diamond earrings. "Mr. Cole prefers simplicity," she said. "No unnecessary chatter, no sudden movements, and always stay one step behind him when entering a room." Lila smiled faintly. "Sounds like he is training a soldier, not a wife." Mrs. Weaver's lips tightened. "He values precision. That is all." The elevator opened with a quiet chime. Adrian Cole appeared, immaculate in a black tuxedo, his expression unreadable. His eyes swept over her once, then returned to his cufflinks. "You clean up well," he said flatly. "And you give compliments like business memos," she replied before she could stop herself. His gaze lifted, and for a brief second, amusement flickered across his face. "Just remember your role tonight, Mrs. Cole. This gala is not a fairy tale. It is a battlefield." At the hotel ballroom, flashes of cameras greeted them the moment they stepped out of the car. Adrian's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her through the crowd. Every step was rehearsed, but Lila's pulse still raced. She smiled when he smiled, nodded when he did, and tried to ignore the whispers following her like shadows. "Who is she? She must be his new charity project. She does not look like she belongs here." She felt each word sting like a pin. But Adrian did not flinch. He leaned slightly toward her and murmured, "Keep your head high. You belong here as long as I say you do." Dale, of Vay works. The night blurred into a haze of champagne glasses and hollow laughter. Then came Clarissa Ward, the socialite who had once been Adrian's fiancée. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were knives. So this is the new Mrs. Cole, Clarissa said sweetly. You must have quite a story, dear. Tell me, how does one go from serving drinks to wearing diamonds? Lila froze, but Adrian's voice cut through the tension. Careful, Clarissa, he said calmly. You are confusing arrogance with class again. Lila turned toward him in surprise. He had not raised his voice, but every nearby conversation stopped. Clarissa's smile wavered. I was just curious. There was a grade R at bring. Curiosity is fine, Adrian said, until it becomes cruelty. He lifted his glass. Enjoy your evening. He led Lila away, his hand firm on her back. When they reached the terrace, the city lights shimmered below. Lila let out a breath she had been holding. You did not have to defend me, she said softly. Yes, I did, he replied. You are my wife, remember? Even if it is only on paper. She looked up at him. It felt real, she whispered. He glanced down, eyes unreadable. Maybe that is the problem. Inside, the orchestra began playing again. Adrian offered his hand. Come, dance with me. I do not know how, she admitted. Then follow my lead, and it not of the tile in my bite plan. His hands settled at her waist, guiding her with quiet confidence. The world seemed to slow, the crowd faded, the lights softened, and for a moment it did not matter that their marriage was fake or that they were from different worlds. It only mattered that he was holding her close, and she could hear his heartbeat just beneath his calm facade. When the music ended, he stepped back, his expression composed again. You did well, he said. The board will be pleased. Lila forced a smile. So that is what this was? A test? Everything is a test, Adrian replied quietly. As they walked out into the night, flashes of cameras followed them. Somewhere deep inside, Lila knew the line between pretending and feeling was starting to blur, and once it did, there would be no going back. The morning after the gala, every magazine cover in New York City had their photo. Adrian Cole's secret wife steals the spotlight. The headlines were everywhere, on screens, in elevators, even in the newspapers stacked outside coffee shops. Lila Torres sat at the breakfast table in the penthouse, staring at her phone. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She had never seen so many people talking about her in her life. Mrs. Weaver poured coffee into Adrian's cup with the same calm precision as always. Congratulations, sir. The board has already scheduled an emergency meeting. They seem impressed. Adrian folded the newspaper and glanced toward Lila. You handled yourself well last night, he said. She lifted her head. You mean I did not embarrass you? He almost smiled. That too. For the next several days, her life became a blur of lessons, fittings, and public appearances. Public relations teams trained her on how to smile for cameras, how to answer polite questions without revealing anything, and how to walk beside Adrian without looking overwhelmed. She did everything she could to keep up. By the end of the week, Adrian took her to a charity dinner hosted by the company's board. It was her first major public test, and everyone was watching. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and whispers. Remember, Adrian said quietly as they walked through the doors. Grace under pressure. You do not need to speak much. Just be yourself. Whatever version of that you can manage in this room. Lila nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She greeted people politely, answered small talk with soft smiles. But halfway through the night, trouble came dressed in pearls and perfume. A board member's wife, Mrs. Langford, cornered Lila near the dessert table. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes gleamed with judgment. You must be quite extraordinary to have captured Mr. Cole's attention, she said. A waitress, was it? How inspiring. Do tell us your secret. A few guests nearby laughed under their breath. The moment felt suffocating, but before Lila could respond, Adrian appeared beside her, his hand lightly resting on her back. His voice was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. My wife's only secret, he said, is dignity, something a few people here could learn. The room fell silent. The color drained from Mrs. Langford's face. Adrian turned to Lila and said simply, Shall we? And led her away before anyone could recover. Outside on the terrace, the night air was cool. Lila exhaled slowly, her pulse racing. You did not have to do that, she murmured. Yes, I did, he said. You are my wife, remember? And you carried yourself better than most of them ever could. For the first time, his tone softened in a way she had not heard before. It made her chest tighten. You are starting to sound like you mean it. she said quietly. Adrian met her eyes. Maybe I do. The orchestra inside began playing again, soft and distant. He looked toward the stars. When I was younger, he said, my father used to say love was a weakness. I built everything on that belief. Then you walked into my life and turned it into a question. Lila's breath caught. And what is the answer? He smiled faintly. I do not know yet. They're well God. They stood in silence, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. For a man who had spent his life calculating every move, Adrian Cole suddenly looked uncertain. For a woman who had spent her life running, Lila finally felt still. When they returned inside, flashes of cameras greeted them once again. Adrian leaned close and whispered, just one more smile, Mrs. Cole. The world is watching. She smiled not because the cameras demanded it, but because, for the first time, she wanted to. The weekend came with an invitation that made Lila Torres's stomach twist. Adrian Cole's family estate in Connecticut. It was supposed to be a simple visit for the press, a chance to prove that their marriage was authentic. But Lila could already sense the test behind the polite words. The car ride was quiet. Adrian stared out the window, the landscape changing from the steel of Manhattan to rolling green hills and wide driveways lined with oaks. When the car turned onto a long cobblestone path, the mansion appeared white stone, massive pillars, a fountain that glimmered in the sunlight. It looked like something from another century, untouched by time or kindness. Welcome to Cole Manor, Adrian said, his tone unreadable. Do not worry, my family will not bite. Lila gave a nervous laugh. That does not sound very convincing. He glanced at her, his eyes softening for just a second. Stay close to me. They respect strength, not apologies. Inside, the house smelled faintly of roses and old money. Portraits lined the hall, faces with sharp cheekbones and colder eyes. In the parlor waited Adrian's mother, Margaret Cole, dressed in pearls and quiet disapproval. So this is your wife, Margaret said, her tone cool. I thought perhaps the tabloids exaggerated. Lila smiled politely. It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Cole. Margaret's gaze swept from her simple necklace to her clasped hands. I suppose Adrian enjoys surprises. And you want us to dap. The afternoon dragged into a series of subtle interrogations, questions wrapped in compliments, comments disguised as smiles. Lila answered as gracefully as she could. When she stumbled over the name of an opera composer, Margaret's lips twitched with satisfaction. At dinner, the tension sharpened. The long mahogany table stretched like a battlefield. Lila sat beside Adrian, trying to remember which fork to use while every eye in the room waited for her to fail. Margaret spoke deliberately. Tell us, dear, how did you and my son meet? Lila hesitated. Adrian's hand brushed against hers under the table. A silent cue. She smiled and said, It was unexpected. He helped me when I needed it most. And today self-EC. Margaret arched an eyebrow. How noble. Adrian rarely helps anyone unless it serves a purpose. The air froze. Adrian set his glass down. Mother. The single word carried a quiet authority that made the servants stop moving. That will be enough. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Later, when they were alone in the guest suite, Lila sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the lawn. Adrian loosened his tie, his expression tired. You handled that better than most people do, he said. Your mother hates me, she replied softly. She hates losing control, he corrected. Do not take it personally. She looked at him. Does she ever approve of anyone? And Handsepper sighed 90 a word. Once, he said after a pause. My father. She never forgave him for dying first. They both laughed quietly, the sounds soft in the heavy room. It was the first time she had seen him drop his armor completely. He sat down beside her, their shoulders almost touching. The silence between them felt different now, no longer awkward, but fragile and human. You do not have to protect me, Lila said. Maybe I want to, Adrian replied. For a man built on logic, the admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He looked away, but not before she saw it, the crack in his composure, the hint of warmth he could not hide. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Lila watched the first drops of rain hit the window pane. Somewhere deep down, she knew the storm was not just in the sky. It was inside both of them, growing louder, waiting to break. And as Adrian stood to leave, his voice low, almost hesitant, he said, Get some rest, Mrs. Cole. Tomorrow will not be easy. She nodded, but sleep never came. Because for the first time, the lie they built together felt dangerously close to the truth. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the air around the Cole estate still felt heavy. Lila Torres woke early, the sky outside still gray with mist. She dressed quietly and stepped out into the garden, hoping to find a moment of peace before another day of judgment began. She found Adrian Cole already there, standing by the old fountain, his phone pressed to his ear. His expression was tense, sharper than she had ever seen it. "Do not let the press near that story," he said. "I do not care what it costs. Handle it." When he ended the call, he saw her watching and exhaled. "It seems our fake marriage has become the board's favorite topic again." Lila frowned. "What happened?" "Someone leaked photographs of the contract," he said, voice clipped. "And someone else confirmed the details. They are claiming this entire marriage was a publicity stunt." Her heart dropped. How could they know about the contract? "I intend to find out," Adrian said. "But until then, we have to stay calm." By the time they returned to New York that afternoon, the story had already exploded across every media outlet. Headlines screamed, "Adrian Cole's marriage was a business deal." Paparazzi swarmed outside the penthouse. Lila's phone rang nonstop with reporters demanding a statement. Adrian called an emergency meeting with his legal team, but even his control had limits. "They are calling it fraud," one of the lawyers said. "If we do not manage the narrative, the board might vote to suspend you." They glassed in four. Lila stood silently in the corner, her hands clasped. She had no words. The life she had built these past weeks was unraveling faster than she could breathe. After the meeting, she approached him. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "If I had not come into your world." He cut her off. "Stop! You did not leak that contract. You have done nothing wrong." But his eyes betrayed the pressure he felt. "The timing is too perfect," he said, pacing. "The only person who could have known the details was someone close. Someone inside this house." That night, Lila sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the hateful comments flooding social media. Gold digger, actress, fraud. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. When Adrian walked in, she quickly wiped them away. "Do not let them get to you," he said softly. "You are stronger than this." Her voice trembled. "You say that, like you know me." He stepped closer. "I am starting to." For a brief moment, the tension between them broke. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. The world outside, the scandal, the cameras, none of it mattered. What existed in that quiet moment felt real, fragile, and terrifying. But reality crashed back too soon. His phone buzzed again, and his expression darkened as he read the message. "The board meeting is tomorrow morning," he said. "They want my resignation. They're madly." Lila felt her chest tighten. "Because of me?" "Because I gave them a reason to doubt me," he replied bitterly. "And they will use you to finish the job." He turned away, shoulders heavy with frustration. "Go pack your things," he said quietly. "It is safer if you leave before the press finds this address." Lila's voice broke. "Is that an order?" "It is a precaution." When she walked to the door, she paused. "I did not want any of this, Adrian. But I also did not lie about how I feel when I am with you." He froze, but said nothing. Only the faint sound of rain against the windows filled the silence. She stepped out of the penthouse and disappeared into the city, leaving behind the life and the man she had never meant to love. That night, Adrian stood alone by the window, staring at the skyline that had once been his empire. For the first time, it felt hollow. The contract that had begun as protection had turned into a weapon, and the woman he had sworn to keep at a distance was now the only person who had ever made him feel alive. The following morning, the city was buzzing with news of Adrian Cole's downfall. The headlines were brutal. "Billionaire's fake marriage scandal shocks Wall Street." Lila Torres saw it all from the small cafe window, where she now worked anonymously, her uniform plain, her hair tied back like it had been before everything began. She had left his world behind, but pieces of it still followed her wherever she went. Every time the cafe door opened, her heart jumped. Every time she saw a man in a dark suit, she thought it might be him. But Adrian Cole had disappeared from the public eye. Rumors said the board had forced him out. Others said he had fled to Europe. None of it mattered now. Until that afternoon, when the television above the counter flickered with a live broadcast. "Breaking news," the reporter announced. Adrian Cole, the former CEO of Cole Industries, is holding a press conference at the company headquarters. Sources say he plans to make a personal statement regarding his resignation. Lila froze, her hands trembling as the camera cut to him. He stood behind a podium, calm but pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. The flashes of cameras filled the room like lightning. "Good morning," Adrian began. "I owe you all the truth." The room hushed. He looked directly into the camera, as if speaking only to her. "Yes," he said. "The marriage began as a contract. I will not deny that. It was intended to protect my company's reputation and to shield a woman who needed safety. But somewhere between the lie and the life we built, it stopped being an act. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with her." The reporters gasped. Questions erupted, but Adrian raised a hand. "I am not here to save my reputation," he continued. "I am here to take responsibility. The person who leaked the contract was one of my own executives, motivated by greed. They will face legal action. But Lila Torres, she did nothing wrong. She was honest when the rest of us were pretending." Lila stood frozen in front of the television, her throat tight with emotion. She could not believe what she was hearing. "I resign willingly," Adrian said, "because no empire, no fortune is worth losing the one person who taught me what truth actually feels like." The cameras flashed again. His voice dropped, softer now. "If you are watching, Lila, I am sorry. Not for the contract, but for making you believe you were only part of one." The cafe was silent. Even the customers had stopped to watch. Lila pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. By evening, the video had gone viral. Millions of comments flooded in support, disbelief, forgiveness. But all Lila could think about was the man who had just risked everything for her. That night, rain began to fall over the city. She walked the familiar streets until she found herself standing outside the Cole Industries building. The lobby lights were still on. Through the glass doors, she saw him alone, packing the last of his belongings into a box. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. He looked up, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "You should not be here," he said quietly. "And yet I am," she replied, her voice steady. "You once told me to stay close to you because your world only respected strength. I am here to remind you I learned that strength from you." Adrian set the box down slowly. The distance between them disappeared as she walked closer. "You ruined your career," she said softly. "For me. Is it backwardly a?" He shook his head. "For the truth." Then she smiled through her tears. "Maybe both." The silence that followed was full of everything they had left unsaid: fear, loss, love, and the fragile hope of beginning again. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring he had carried since their contract began. "This time," he said, his voice low. "No lawyers, no signatures, just a promise." And as she nodded, tears still glistening on her cheeks, he slipped the ring onto her finger. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time, it sounded like applause. A month later, spring returned to New York City. The cold rain had lifted, replaced by soft sunlight that spilled through the windows of a modest art gallery tucked on a quiet street in Soho. On the front door hung a small brass sign that read, "The Second Chance Foundation, founded by Adrian and Lila Cole." Inside, paintings lined the walls, each one created by survivors of domestic abuse. Women who had once been silenced, but now found their voices through color and canvas. The hum of quiet conversation filled the room, and in the center stood Lila Torres, no longer the frightened waitress who once hid under a table. Her eyes carried peace now, and her hands no longer trembled when the cameras turned toward her. Adrian stood beside her, no longer the cold CEO the world once feared. He wore no suit today, just a simple dark shirt, his sleeves rolled up as he helped adjust a painting that had slipped slightly to the side. When he noticed Lila watching him, he smiled. "Still crooked?" She shook her head. "Perfect! For once you do not need to fix anything." Guests filled the gallery, many of them women. The foundation had helped during the past weeks. Reporters had tried to label their comeback story redemption, scandal turned love, billionaire rebuilds from ruin, but to them, it was simply life, rebuilt piece by piece. As the evening light softened, Adrian stepped onto the small stage near the back and took the microphone. His voice carried easily, calm but full of warmth. "A few months ago," he said, "I stood in a boardroom and thought success meant control. I was wrong. Success is not about power. It is about purpose." And love, he paused, looking at Lila. Love is not a contract you sign, it is a promise you keep. The crowd applauded. Lila's eyes shimmered with quiet pride. When he stepped down, she met him halfway, taking his hand. Do you realize that you just quoted yourself from our contract? He laughed softly. The difference is, this time, I meant it. 9 Thames a grade Marcus. Outside, the city glowed like a living heartbeat. The same skyline that had once felt cold and unreachable now shimmered with warmth. The world had forgiven them, or perhaps forgotten the scandal, but neither of them cared. They had built something real out of something false, and that was enough. Later that night, after the guests left, they stood alone in the gallery. The last painting on the far wall caught Lila's eye, a simple watercolor of a woman crouched under a table, light shining from beneath the tablecloth. She smiled faintly. I painted that the week after I met you, she said. I wanted to remember the night I stopped running. Adrian walked up behind her, his voice low. And the night I stopped hiding. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a small, worn piece of paper. It was their original contract, the one that had once defined every boundary between them. The ink had faded, the edges creased. Without a word, he tore it in half and let the pieces fall into the trash bin nearby. Lila turned to him, her voice soft. What was that for? He smiled. The final clause, freedom. She leaned into his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For a moment, everything felt still, the noise of the city outside, the whispers of the past, the ache of what they had lost. All of it faded into the background. As they locked up and stepped out into the cool night air, Adrian slipped his arm around her shoulders. Where to now, Mrs. Cole? He asked gently. She looked up at him, her lips curling into a smile. Anywhere, as long as you are there. The camera of a passing journalist clicked once, capturing the moment, no longer a scandal, no longer a performance, but 2 people who had found truth in the unlikeliest of beginnings. And somewhere, deep in the city that had first brought them together, the world went on. But for Adrian and Lila, the story that began with a lie ended with a promise to love, to protect, and to never run again.